بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Today I have a very special guest with us, which is Sheikh Riaz Ansary. Sheikh Riaz is actually, he was a teacher of mine and I really respect him a lot. He helped me through a lot of weird questions that I was asking him. And I really think he's one of the most intelligent people I've learned from. That's what I believe, sincerely. He graduated from the College of Sharia in the Islamic University of Medina in 1993, and he completed his master's degree in Usul al-Fiqh at the International Islamic University of Malaysia. In 1997, he moved to the UAE, sorry, where he worked as a translator and editor, and as a teacher of Arabic and Islamic studies at the New Muslim Center in Sharjah. He's done so many things. He has translated a number of Arabic books into English. And he's the author of the book A Search for Happiness, published by Darul Huda in India. And Dr. Riyad, correct me if I'm wrong, is currently in Malaysia pursuing a PhD at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization. I don't know if this is...
That's pretty out of date.
Oh, sorry about
Yeah,
that.
I finished the PhD, I think, in 2015. So that's
Oh,
how old that posting is.
wow.
Um, and I live in Turkey.
Oh, okay. So your PhD in Islamic thought and civilization, or what's the
Well, that
what's
was
the?
it's a place called the Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization.
Okay,
It's a
but
branch of the Islamic University of Malaysia.
okay, and the PhD is in Islamic thought,
It
or?
was um, it was on a tafsir genre
No.
in which authors were responding to perceived difficulties in the Quran.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so maybe that has some relation to the topics we're gonna discuss today. The first thing I would like to, well, I would ask you what do you think about it, and maybe we can discuss is the relevance of someone, let's say just a young Muslim who is going to the university, he's studying, I don't know, a degree in natural science or a master's or a PhD in natural science or social sciences. And what I see in a lot of these young people is that they start believing whatever they're being taught, uh, and they don't have like a sound epistemological basis. Even people, when they're studying like natural science, they usually don't study, or they don't study, I mean, they don't focus too much on philosophy of science. And I do
Yeah.
believe that people tend to blindly follow, even though they claim to be rational and to be advocates of reason. At the end of the day, when you're studying science, but you're not even able to deconstruct the method, or to know like the human elements of the scientific method, I do believe uh, that turns people into blind followers. And whenever they perceive a contradiction between the Quran, for example, and whatever they're studying, they start like having doubt in the Quran. So in what I'm saying is that they're too quick in deconstructing the Quran, but they're not like very into deconstructing their own method, or the method, or the even the philosophical presupposition behind whatever they're studying. So what are your thoughts? Have you seen these, and do you think what would be a solution for this?
Oh, you you asked some huge questions. Um, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Um, well, uh, you have to. I think you've sort of you've summed it up. Uh, you know, you've heard of the ethologists, I think they call them, Conrad Lorenz, uh, studying animal behavior. He was a pioneer in that field. And so he did this famous experiment where um, when geese they had their eggs, right? The eggs are ready to hatch. He would take them away from the mother goose, and when the little geese came out of the shell, he was the first thing they saw, and so he identified this process called imprinting. So the first thing they saw was him, and they treated him like normal geese would treat their mother.
Mhm.
They followed him everywhere he went. So that's called imprinting. And so, you know, especially when you're about 18, you just left home, right? Whatever somebody tells you, it's just like comes
Yeah.
into your head and bam, you know, that's the truth.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you don't have tools, if you're not given tools when you're first studying, then to examine your discipline, then you sort of take certain things axiomatically, and you just assume them to be true without actually examining them. So, you know, studying philosophy of science is an important thing for people who study science. If you don't study that, then there's a major problem, because if you understand material things to be the base nature of reality, how do you know that? You know, that's an assumption.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you just accept that that's a given, that's true, that's fact. No, that's an assumption. That's axiomatic, and axioms can't be proved. You there are certain things that you take axiomatically, and then you build everything else upon them. So if that's your starting point, then everything else will flow from that. So there's a famous, I don't know how famous it is, but it's a quote that stuck with me. Um, he's a Harvard professor of biology, and he said, "There's nothing about science that requires us to have a materialist point of view, but once we take that point of view, then we cannot open the door even a crack for some other point of view, and we have to explain everything based on our starting point, no matter how counterintuitive our explanation sounds."
Yeah.
You know, it's amazingly honest
Yeah.
declaration of the way things
Doctrine.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting to me. I do believe that when you claim that everything which exists is, I mean, basically everything which exists is whatever you can prove empirically, that statement in itself, you cannot prove it empirically because it's a rational statement. So to some degree, it's I would say it's a contradiction. One of the topics I wanted to discuss with you connected with this is the importance of learning usul al-fiqh, which is basically the Islamic epistemology. One of the reasons I do believe, for example, if a young Muslim is studying natural science, they should get at least one or two books on the history and the philosophy of science, and one or two books on usul al-fiqh, because they will be able to deconstruct. And the interesting thing is that Muslim tradition in itself is very happy to quote unquote deconstruct our sources. So you can separate or differentiate between that which is absolute and that which is not absolute. Now, I see a lot of people like defending theories in the scientific arena, and actually in the social sciences much so, because things are not like so easy to prove empirically when it comes to social phenomena. And I see people too quickly accepting information without being able to just tell me to what degree is that information absolute or non-absolute. So, for example, I come across a young man. He has studied, I don't know, anthropology, and they tell me that it is very clear scientifically that monotheism was invented, I don't know, 10,000 years ago. And when you ask that person, okay, how do you know that? Oftentimes they don't even know how to reply. You know, they've heard it in their classes, in the books they have been given to read, but they themselves have not even stopped to think like basic questions. So, for example, when I ask them, what's the evidence? They will say, well, there is some painting here, there is some artifact there. Don't you think that the conclusion that you're reaching is too big of a conclusion with very little evidence? So what I'm saying is that the evidence is very small, but the conclusions are very big. And this can happen in religion as well. I mean, like someone may tell you that the earth is flat or whatever, because the Quran says so. And when you ask them, they bring you a couple of verses that can be interpreted in different ways. So I think that people don't have the ability to differentiate between what is absolute and what is not absolute. And that brings about a lot of the problems and supposed contradictions that people have between religion or what they call religion versus science, or, you know, just the shubuhat and the problems that come to the mind of the young Muslim who is studying one of these sciences within a secular framework. You know, sometimes they don't seem to be aware of the philosophical component behind what they're studying. Sorry if that's a question.
Well, you started with a question, which was about usul fiqh. And so usul fiqh is a methodology for it guides ijtihad. So ijtihad is legal reasoning. So you have, I mean, Muslims in general accept the idea that the Quran is divinely revealed, and that the Prophet ﷺ also received a kind of revelation which has reached us in the form of hadiths, things that he said or did, or that he approved of by tacit approval. His companions did it in his presence, and he didn't object. So those sources of Islamic law, you have to figure out what do they mean, first of all, and then it's like you have a map now. You know, do you hold it this way or this way?
Yeah.
You know, exactly where am I on this map? You know, how do you apply this map now to the world that you're living in now? Because these texts were revealed 1400 years ago, and the world has changed a lot. So how does this map relate to the world that we're living in? I mean, that's an important question. And so it's usul fiqh is like a user's guide to the map. You know, how do you use this map? Yeah. Now, one of the things that usul fiqh investigates is called the hujjiyah, or the authority of classes of evidence. And in my experience, however, I've never come across an usul fiqh book where the hujjiyah of the Quran is discussed, the authority of the Quran. And that's because it's taken for granted. If you're a Muslim, then you already accept that. Yeah. I think one of the things that's particularly problematic for Muslims of our time is that if you ask most Muslims, people who are born into Muslim family, if you ask most of them, do you believe in God? They'll say, yeah, of course. If you ask them, do you believe that the Quran is from God? The question becomes much more difficult. A lot of people, it's like, I don't know. I have no idea. It's something that people say, and so, okay, I say it. And it's ironically, there's a hadith about that. Right? In Abu Dawood, that a person is questioned in the grave. So, who's your Lord? And what was your religion or your way of life? And what do you say about this man? You're shown the Prophet ﷺ. So if you're a believer, you say, my Lord is Allah, my deen is Islam, and that man is Muhammad Rasulullah, the messenger of Allah. Okay. And if you fail the test, in this version in Abu Dawood, it's the person is like so scared that this is the response, and then he says, I don't know. I heard people saying something, so I said it. Yeah. So, and that's one major problem. So there are people who is like, I don't know, I'm going along with it. Yeah, this what we are, and so yeah. But if there's no ascertainment that there's something special about this book, then what kind of faith do you have? Now, I remember having a discussion with a friend of mine. We're making i'tikaf, staying in the mosque during Ramadan. This was in Malaysia. He was a fellow student at the university. And so something came up about this topic. And so I said, he was saying, when I was in high school, I examined the Quran, and I decided that it was scientifically miraculous, and that a human being in 7th century Arabia wouldn't be able to accurately describe the physical world in the way that we find those descriptions in the Quran. So I asked him, if you'd lived 100 years ago, on what basis do you think you would have arrived at the conclusion that the Quran is miraculous? And so then it's like, okay, there's a linguistic aspect to it also. So I didn't push him on that, but I had a similar conversation once with a Malaysian gentleman, and so he was saying the Quran is miraculous, and so I said, in what way? Just to see, where his head was at. And so he said, well, it's a linguistic miracle. And I said, do you speak Arabic? He said, no. So I said, so how do you know? How do you personally know that it's a linguistic miracle? He said, well, people I trust said it was a linguistic miracle. Yeah. So actually, that's called when you say, okay, I trust so-and-so, and he says something, so I'm going with that. That's called taqlid. On fiqh issues, that's acceptable, because you don't have time to master all the tools that are necessary to determine, well, what does Allah want from me in this situation? It's a complicated issue. So you go to somebody who's spent the time to gain that expertise. But when it comes to issues of belief, you're not supposed to make taqlid.
Yeah.
So that's a real issue. Now, people who aren't Arabs, on what basis are they supposed to arrive at some kind of firm understanding that there's something unusual about this book? So yeah, it's, in my opinion, there are certain things about it that are scientifically miraculous. But I think, somebody who has done a huge service, in my opinion, for Islam and the Muslims in the English-speaking world is Nouman Ali Khan. He has this short, it's a series that he did over 2 years. Each episode is about 4 or 5 minutes, and he'll take 2 verses of the Quran, and they're basically saying almost the same thing, but there are subtle differences. And he'll go into, why is that? What's the context in this passage and what's the context in that passage? And the fact that the Quran wasn't written down by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He couldn't read or write. He couldn't stay up late at night and compare, okay, in this one I'm going to do it like this and that.
Yeah.
It wasn't revealed like that at all. And yet it's like so precisely fitting, this wording fits precisely for that context. That wording fits precisely for that context. I mean, who could keep all that straight? So 1 or 2 of those is like, okay. But when you have 50 of them, it's like, it's, this metaphor of the water dripping on a rock, so if enough drops of water fall on a rock, you get a little depression, and the rock eventually becomes a hole is bored through the rock. So
it's interesting that you mentioned this, because I read, there are actually classical books in Islam about this. Like it's called al-mutashabihat. So it's like comparison of verses that are exactly equal, but there is one tiny difference, which is very subtly related to the context. And when you start accumulating like a lot of instances, obviously you cannot attribute it to chance. I'm actually in the Spanish language doing a video series called The Clear Signs, in which I try to explain the miracle of the Quran. And this is one of the topics that I focus on. Because I know that by sending someone one of these videos, it's not like definitive or conclusive evidence, but you have to understand rationally that when you start like bringing too many instances, it is impossible if you don't have a written record to be able to keep track of what you're saying, and one preposition here and one there. And now my question would be, and this is what I believe, when we send young people out there in the world, it is not enough for us to teach them Islam in the sense that we will teach them rituals anymore. Now we need to give them like the intellectual tools first to be able to know that this is the truth, from not from an argument from authority, like because I said so, but they actually like studying the miracle of the Quran in some sense becomes now as important as teaching them Al-Fatiha. That's what I believe.
Yeah.
And then obviously I would give them the epistemological tools so that they are able to deconstruct everything else. And even, one thing I believe is that if they want to deconstruct Islam, then try and do it. It's like the Quran says, go and find out contradictions in the Quran. So I've been listening to a lot of like Christian intellectuals, like historians of the New Testament and so on. And they seem to have like a double personality. Like, as a historian, they know that the historical Jesus is not the one they find in the Gospels. But at the same time, theologically, they do believe that the Holy Spirit guided whatever, the canonization of the of the New Testament. So they clearly have two separated sides, which I believe they are contradictory. And I do believe that the Muslims should never be in that situation. Do you have any thought on that? I mean, to me, it's like a failure that a Muslim has to resort to that. And that's because we didn't give them enough tools to be able to know that this is the truth. Like, for example, when you study the history of the Quran manuscripts, you should not become more skeptic about the Quran. That's what I believe. So when people start saying, I'm having doubts about Islam because I don't have enough evidence about this or that, I think something is wrong, maybe in the way we taught Islam, or they haven't been exposed to enough information. I don't know.
Well, we live in a world that's changed drastically in my lifetime. So, you know, it's literally a lifetime ago. You know, I accepted Islam at the age of 22, but I was born in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
And my father sent me to the mosque when I was 6, I guess, to learn Al-Fatiha and that kind of stuff. And so, if you think about how those boys, you know, I have no idea, you know, those boys, they were village boys who came to that same mosque with me, and I was from a totally different world. Those village boys, you know, what kind of understanding of Islam did they receive? You know, for me, at that age, it didn't mean anything. You know, it was like I was like a trained to be like a parrot, to make some sounds that were in a language I didn't understand, and
Yeah.
you know, it's just bizarre, really. But if everybody around you is doing the same, and that's what we do, then that can kind of work in that society of in that type of an environment. It can kind of work. And only a rare person would be exposed to some other worldview.
Yeah.
Now we live in the age of the internet, you know, and there's no way on earth that we can keep our children in some kind of like tower or circle where nothing can get in. No, everything's getting in. So if you don't have those internal notions of right and wrong and reality, then you're going to be swept away. Because people, you know, if you watch a child, you know, when that child is 2 years old or 3 years old, and their parent is making salat, you'll see the child doing some actions that look kind of like salat. It's just natural, right?
Yeah.
So that's an indicator to us that human beings have an instinct for imitating those around them. And when you're very young, it's your parents. And then you reach that stage where you're looking for the bigger world. And so, you know, your friends become your criteria of cool. You know, when you're in high school, the issue is, you know, who's cool. And so that means whatever they're about, then you're trying to be about the same thing. And it just keeps, you know, there's just a more insistent barrage of that when you have social media and the internet. Yeah. So if our children don't have any kind of like fortification, then they're helpless. We've left them helpless. And in this regard, I'll plug a book of a friend of mine. I mean, he's a new friend. I wouldn't say he's a deep friend, but Mustafa al-Khattab, he's an Egyptian brother who he did a translation of the Quran called the Clear Quran. And he's currently working on basically that. He's taking that translation, but he made it even simpler. It's a very interesting process. He would give like pages or something like that to young children, and raised in the West. And so he would ask them to read it and circle words they didn't understand.
Oh, cool.
And so, to keep working and working to make it simpler. And so then, he has asbab al-nuzul. It's like a tafsir for young children. And he'll have what he calls background stories, where it'll be the sabab al-nuzul, the circumstances that triggered the revelation of the verse. And then there'll be these other like stories that are they're nothing to do with the text, but they're somehow, there's some kind of resonance between that story and what's going on in the surah or in that passage. And it's very, very interactive, and the colorful layout and stuff like that. So it's really attractive to children. And he was showing, he was comparing his version of a passage with some other like translation that was intended for an adult to read. And you see these passages, the translations. If you were to give that to a kid, they wouldn't understand it at all. So putting it within reach of a child, that's a really great service,
Yeah, that's very good. I think I think it was published already. I believe.
Yeah, he's in the process of publishing it bit by bit. I don't think he's finished it yet.
Okay. I see. These are the kinds of things that I wish more Muslims, I mean, every Muslim should have in their home, because I do believe that to some degree there are many resources which we are not. It's not only having resources, but making them known to people so that people know they exist. And obviously in Spanish, we have a bigger problem because we don't even have the resources. But I guess we'll have to work a lot in this generation. I've thought in the past, like as a project in the future, like doing something similar but with more advanced topics. Like, for example, to prepare kids for the world they will be living in. Like, for example, related to modernity and the changes it has produced on humanity. As I said, philosophy of science, atheism, evolution, all these kinds of controversies, because I'm very afraid that when kids get exposed to it in the outside world, we have not taught them anything about them before. So, and I think that's a mistake on our part. Like, I show you something about the Quran, and then when he goes to school or to high school or even to just regular school, they will be exposed to different things, and they will start thinking, my parents didn't tell me the whole thing, they just told me a part of the story. So I think it would be a good idea to pick these issues, even gender ideology, these issues that they will be confronted with, and creating some sort of tales or books for children. I don't know, have you ever thought of that?
I personally, that's not my specialty.
Yeah, I understand.
you know, my wife, she always told me, talk to your kids like kids. You're talking over their head, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not the best person to be doing that, but I think that that's a kind of project that it would be good to have like a group of people working on it, so
Mhm.
that um, you know, multiple inputs can be actually very beneficial for that. So
Yeah.
if somebody's working on a project like that, I'd be uh, thrilled to be a part of it. But um, it's it's not the kind of thing that I could do on my own. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, just to discuss ideas. I would like to thank you for having been here, and maybe we can do something else some other day. You think that's a good
Okay,
idea?
sounds
Okay.
good.
Okay.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.